Hello and welcome to our Walk in My Shoes webinar series for professional advisors. My name is Zofia Sahanik and I am the Director of Membership and Development here at Philanthropy Impact and your moderator for today. If you'd like to know more about us or how to become a member or about our training programme for advisors, please get in touch. My details are available in the chat or at the end of this recording. Today we are coming together to discuss the implications of both COVID-19 and Brexit on philanthropic giving and social impact investing. Our chair on this huge topic is George King, partner at MASECO Private Wealth. And joining him, we welcome Richard Cassell, partner at Withers Worldwide, Keith MacDonald, partner at EY, Simon Weil, partner at BDB Pitmans, and Angela Kail, Director of Consulting at NPC. As this is a strictly 30-minute session, we ask you only use the chat to leave comments and post questions. Please remain respectful to the conversation, the panelists and each other. Thank you all very much for joining today, and I will now pass over to George to make a start.
Thank you for that. We've been doing over 20 of these now. I think part of the appeal is that they are on topic, but also quite succinct. They're in and out and quick, and so we're going to stay very much cognizant of time. As a result, the framing for the conversation really is quite simple. We have had a lot of conversations for many, many months about both of these topics, about COVID and the back and forth development and implications for the economy and for jobs and for all sorts of things. Our specific focus is around the allocation of capital to try and do good things in the world. So that's philanthropy, as is in the name of the organization, but a wider spectrum than that in terms of what has happened and what we expect to happen going forward as implications. Now, of course, we're getting Brexit coming closer and closer to happening. We've had years of talking about potential implications of Brexit, but now they're coming together at sort of this critical moment coming into toward the end of the year. We thought it was a useful time to access a wide range of experts, get their perspective on the coalition of COVID and Brexit and what that's meaning for charities, for those in need, for access to capital, etc. I'll ask everyone to just give a very brief explanation of who you are so that the audience sort of has a sense of who they're hearing from. And Keith, I thought I'd start with you, given your role at EY, seems like a good place to start since you're often doing a lot of this frame setting. So Keith, why don't you lead us off in your thoughts about where we've been and where we're going with COVID and Brexit?
Right, and all of us within the space of half an hour, as you say, quite a challenge. It's Keith MacDonald. My day job is I look after our work in wealth management, private banking. And a lot of what I do is the crossover between that and the world that George has been describing, from philanthropy through social impact, responsible investing, ESG. I mean, we're a big global firm. We've seen a lot of what's been happening this year globally. We saw it coming through from the Far East very early in the year, implications running through Europe and now around into Latin America, elsewhere. I mean, the main thing, I suppose, is uncertainty, inevitably. Globally, regionally, second wave, people talking third wave, and that ripple effect and the effect of that on the economy, no matter which cut of how you look at it, is inevitably going to keep things up in the air. So I suppose the starting point is don't know, and that level of uncertainty, I'm afraid, is it, if anything, increasing. But from a COVID perspective, I suppose all the way through that capital spectrum, I think philanthropy all the way through to interest in ESG has been heightened. I think there's been a move, what we've seen is a movement, I suppose, again, inevitably, because countries have started looking internally and less externally. But I suppose the upside is that from all perspectives, I think there is a heightened interest, particularly around, you see it from the ESG from one end and the corporate purpose all the way through to philanthropy and philanthropists giving more to the cause. I suppose the extra points of that in terms of uncertainty, and is now Brexit. Which, if there is anything to multiply that uncertainty, Brexit is doing that. The press, I think, doesn't help in terms of our understanding of what's going on. There seems to be, I think, a personal view is a sort of doom mongering in the press around all these things. So trying to really understand what's happening makes that even harder. But from a corporate perspective and an individual and a charity, a third sector perspective, it heightens that level of uncertainty. I think I've probably said the word uncertainty too often, the way we were all saying the word unprecedented too often a little while ago. So I suppose that's my starter for 10.
I think that's a good start, Keith, and I think the uncertainty issue is clearly what underpins all of this. And I think a lot of us are seeing heightened interest. I'm sure we'll come back to that as well. We're clearly not going to replay the politics of Brexit, but the implications are important, and I'm glad you touched on that. And Angela, that sort of feels like a really good segue to you, because clearly we had a lot of concerns early on that a lot less money available. Out of that was maybe there'd be this huge outpouring of funds because there's a huge outpouring of need. So there's two sides of the coin. Would love to start to get your perspective from MPC.
Thank you, George. And investors to help them maximize their social impact. So I've got those two lenses. I'm looking at it from what the sort of charities are saying on a bottom-up sense, as well as what we're hearing from sort of funders and philanthropists. And I'd agree with Keith about the word uncertainties being a key word for 2020, and I would add to that inequality. So, you know, with Brexit, we heard a lot that it was sort of a revolt against the elites. And I think now with COVID, what we're really seeing is those inequalities sort of become apparent to people in ways in which it wasn't previously. So all very well for professionals like myself to be sat at home, not having to put myself at too much COVID risk, but that relies on delivery drivers, bus drivers, etc., who are all much worse paid than me, having to take that risk on. And I think the interplay, therefore, of those two things and how philanthropy reacts to them will be really interesting. That this would be a place-based phenomenon, that we would start to go into or sort of levelling up, the levelling up agenda, reduce the inequalities between places. But I imagine if you were a barman in Bolton, where you're still not allowed to open, but the furlough scheme is closing, you don't feel much like there's a levelling up agenda going on. So I think tackling those inequalities on both the sort of social lens as well as a place lens will be where philanthropy really starts to move and can make a big difference.
That's great. We're definitely going to come back to touch on at least two of those pieces. I want to bring Richard and Simon in just as a reminder. The purpose of Philanthropy Impact is trying to increase sort of bigger, better philanthropy, giving, impact, etc., but specifically through professional advisors. Simon, Richard, that's your bailiwick. You've been doing this for many, many years, both for ultra high net worth people and for charities. So I'd love to start to get your perspectives on this as well. Richard, you look like you're ready to go.
Okay, thank you, George. My name is Richard Cassell. I'm a lawyer, and I've been involved with advising on philanthropy. And I'm also serve as a trustee on a number of grant-making organizations, and I'm a governor of a couple of schools. We live in very uncertain times, as has been said on a number of occasions. And that is a deterrent for some philanthropists, but not for all. Some have responded, I've seen responding to the need they see around them. But it does mean that if, to the extent that donors, the broader swathe of donors, the middle income donors, I think are feeling the uncertainty very acutely, and they're less likely to reach into their pocketbooks. They may be okay financially, but they don't know what tomorrow holds, and that is a major deterrent for philanthropy. We've also seen some charities effectively ceasing operations or reducing operations, and we've seen some charities facing their income falling off a cliff, but with a great need for their operations. So it's a very mixed picture in the charity field, and that again translates into what are philanthropists responding to. They're responding to, I was involved with setting up a charity called Mass for NHS Heroes. Fantastic response with not much fundraising, not much positive fundraising required. On the other hand, I've seen other charities working in less glamorous sectors which have frankly struggled to raise much money and which are getting emergency funding from grant-making organizations. I think the future holds a rise in inequality. We're looking at one of the schools I'm involved with, we're looking at a significant increase in the attainment gap between the less advantaged pupils and the more advantaged pupils. This is a long term. So I think the key for now is that we have, as advisors, and we have to encourage our clients and our philanthropists to think long term. What's happening in education is going to have a long-term impact on inequality in this country. What's happening to some of the charities, they're having to cut some of the core of their operations, and their ability to deliver services in future will be compromised. And so we're looking at, I think, economically, a landscape that is at best uncertain, probably looking at an economic contraction. So it's not a great time for philanthropy, but to the extent that we can encourage people to think long term and to make social investments if they're not making grants, and to invest for the future, that's, I think, the important message for today.
There's several pieces there, Richard, I hope we have time to come back to as well. Given the time frame, I'm going to start to add a steer, Simon. You can pick up on these as well as whatever you had already struck in your mind to lead out with. But you know, I'd love us to start to think about and share with people where we have experienced surprises so far, or where we think there may be some surprises going forward, either in access to capital or allocation of capital, to some of the topics you're talking about, Angela and Richard, as well as we get a little bit more into this, what we're hoping for, what we'd like to see happen. I'll throw on the table some concepts like, is there such a thing as survival of the fittest out of this process, a weeding out and a galvanizing and a focus in the process? And what are some of the things that can be done to galvanize more capital allocation in this environment? So I'll throw those on the table. Simon, you can pick up on any of that or none of it if you had something else you wanted to start with.
Okay. Right. Well, I'm a partner in BDB Pitmans, and like Angela and indeed like Richard, I see it from both perspectives, both the donors, the philanthropists on the one hand, and the charities on the other. And I'm a trustee of a number of grant giving and service providing charities. And I won't repeat what's already been said, but I think COVID undoubtedly has had so far a much bigger impact than Brexit. From where I sit, the interesting thing about Brexit is that if there were to be a no-deal Brexit, it would undoubtedly, at least in the immediate term, have an adverse effect on portfolios and therefore on the capacity of grant givers to assist in this situation. But on the COVID front, I'm seeing major distress in arts and culture, major distress. And the dilemma for the grant givers and the philanthropists is we want to help, but to take up your point about survival of the fittest, we don't want to throw money into something that's going to have no future. And so it's a delicate balancing act of sorting out amongst the needy, the ones that are going to be sustainable. And also, I wonder whether this whole situation might change the whole philanthro-capitalist approach to philanthropy, the I know best because I ran a business approach, the very demanding, exacting approach, and whether it might not lead them to become a little bit more empathic, a little bit more listening. I heard a very interesting commentary on this on the Free Thinking program on Radio 4 a few days ago. And finally, I think that, or I hope that this situation may enable us to introduce charitable remainder gifts, previously known as living legacies, by statute in this country, but we'll just have to see.
Yeah, well,
we certainly need all the tools at our disposal. That's certainly one area where Simon and I completely agree. Yeah. Expand the arsenal. We need to expand the tools in our toolbox.
I think we all agree on that one. Keith, you might want to pick up on the wealth effect issues that Simon just touched on, as well as some other things. And Angela, I'd very much like you to pick up on the concept of sort of the rigor, because that very much plays into both MPC, how you approach things. And so there's a couple of pieces to pick up on Simon's point. Keith, would you like to jump in first?
Yeah, sure. I'm actually just going to come back on that one, because As there's been in the press today as well about the impact of Brexit post-COVID, in parallel, is people's physical location, and we had a move post the Brexit vote of some high net worths moving abroad, families moving abroad, or at least having a sort of, somebody call it a polo mint version, where you don't really have a centre where everybody is, you're scattered around different locations. If that does increase, then that has an impact on tax take in the UK, has an impact on the UK as a centre for some of these families actually being part of the philanthropic process as well. So I think there's a double whammy effect post-COVID. Who is right in terms of how COVID has been approached? Is it New Zealand? Is it Sweden? Is it whoever? I think there's going to be theses written for decades about that, really, in terms of trying to compare like for like. But certainly from a UK perspective, Brexit sort of turning the dial a bit on the impacts of those things as well, I think.
Keith, I'm sorry if I can interject there. I think that's a very good point that you made, that the tendency of people, of rich people, to, if they're feeling that the economic outlook is very uncertain and the tax outlook is probably only going upwards, to think about leaving the UK and moving elsewhere. Because I think philanthropy benefits when people feel a sense of community, even at the highest end of the income spectrum down to the lowest end of the spectrum. And to the extent people are increasingly mobile, they, as a result of the somewhat febrile economic environment, that will reduce the impact of the community and the impact of philanthropy, I'm afraid.
Is no one seeing an effect of markets collapsing in the first quarter, markets largely recovering now, so the wealth fear effect sort of evaporating, and you look around and say, wow, there's this great need, taxes are rising, I'd rather give it away and do good things in the world than have taxes take this money away, which seemed to have disappeared in March, and suddenly it's back in my account and let's go do good things in the world. This need is so acute. Is no one seeing a response like this?
I would actually have to say we've seen the opposite, in that actually in March lots of people dug in generously, and gave money away, even though technically their wealth was down. They weren't seeing it like that. So actually, probably the amount that was given away in March versus the amount that's given away in September, we don't have figures for that. We never have figures that good. But I bet you anything there was much more given away in March.
Interesting. Well, you've got the mic. Why don't you pick up on Simon's earlier comment about that rigor?
Yeah, so I think, leading to your point about survival of the fittest, we can't have survival of the fittest, because what decides about whether or not you survive is your fundraising ability, which is completely divorced from impact, right? So completely divorced. It's not like being in a business where your customers choose whether or not you're good and whether or not they'll spend their money with you. It's a completely different thing. Your users, the people who know whether or not you're any good, are not the people who give you money. And that's what's really worrying. And I think lots of donors now are sort of playing chicken with the government. Macmillan last week announced over 300 redundancies. And I think a lot of people are thinking, well, the government will bail out Macmillan, right? Like, no one's going to allow Macmillan to go down. But actually, the government has this problem as well. It's like, well, we can't bail out every charity and we don't know who's good. So the fact that there hasn't been rigorous impact measurement in the lead up to what is, as Richard said, catastrophic financial impact for the sector is really going to affect donors on who they're giving to. So what we are seeing is that donors are just giving to people that they know. So if you've already had money from them, they're doubling down. Not necessarily because you're any better than the organisation that didn't have money from them, but just because they know you. So they're doubling down.
Arguably, Brexit is local or maybe regional, and COVID is global. I mean, what is that saying about where money is going?
I actually don't think people see it like that. At the moment, currently, I think people still think COVID is a local issue. We're seeing people giving to their local food bank, their local hospital. People aren't twigging that it's a worldwide issue and that it's a huge problem in India yet. That hasn't broken through.
From my observation of what people are giving money to, I completely agree with that. I think people are now very locally focused. and they're very focused on welfare, social welfare organisations. And my concern is that they're not looking long-term enough. I mean, I think there is an immediate social need that many of these sort of food banks and people are doing an excellent job of trying to fill. But we need to think about not just long-term grant making, but long-term impact investing.
And I think this is where another unknown factor is the sort of public-private sector mix in this. I think there's so much distraction from a political perspective, even with something like, the FCO and DFID being consolidated, some of these changes and distraction to deal with things like Brexit. This time last year, we were looking at a lot more public-private sector cooperation in some of these causes, particularly onshore, I think. Whether that will come out in the wash in the next 12, 18 months from a UK perspective or not is a big question.
So 2 questions to add to the table. This number is still on there. One is, in the current environment, given the issues we've been talking about, does it make more sense to be doing social impact investing? Does it make more sense to be doing just straight philanthropy? Where is the best way for this money to flow given the confluence of COVID and Brexit? Is there such a thing? And is that something that professionals, Simon, others, should be advising people to do in terms of they want to go do something? Wait, no, actually do it this way. This is a better way to do it in this environment.
Well, I mean, I echoing what I said earlier, I think that the very, very philanthro-capitalist approach where measurement is all is something that I would suggest that people move away from that, because particularly now there are important things that charities can do that aren't necessarily capable of measurement. And I would encourage a more generous approach to philanthropy.
I've been hearing a lot of that recently, sort of faster, without as much sort of less evidence-based, faster response allocations of capital. Angela, is there a role for that? I know that that's not typically what you guys are helping people with.
Well, I think one of the issues there is, where does the evidence come in? And I think one of the things with COVID is that it's fast changing needs, right? Like the needs were not what we originally thought, they were in different places. So I think I would move the evidence, right? The evidence should be right up front in terms of thinking about the needs assessment rather than the burden on charities, particularly because it means that charities have to think about how they do measurement online. It's much more complicated. Getting those grants out fast, I think, is really important. And I also think with Brexit, so one of the real advantages of Brexit is it allows the UK to set its own path, right? So we're areas where previously we were restricted by the EU. You might think that there's more opportunity for charities to do, things that they might want to do differently. So campaigning on the environment, for example, we could take a completely different approach, perhaps become a lot more greener than the EU. And I think that's an area where measurement is really complicated as well. So I think they have different reasons, but both of them make measurement more complicated.
Much in your bailiwick, you mentioned that these were already areas of interest. Now they're areas of heightened interest. I'd love to get your take, whether it's a view or a forecast or a prediction about how we might see the landscape change more generally and more permanently coming out of all of this environment.
Yeah. I mean, and not just ticking the boxes of ESG, but being and not just climate, but broader aspects of maybe their own foundations, and those, but corporates and their found with the philanthropic and capital providing side and the public sector. if you had those four working in parallel, would be great. But if you had them working together, doing now, and that I think will be internationally as well as domestically. Now, I don't think that's idealistic. I mean, yeah, we do CEO webcasts like this, and every CEO, when they're on screen and this sort of thing, wants to say about the purpose they see their corporates pushing for, whether it be mental health or climate or that is something which I think we've all got to pin people to and make them responsible for, and actually align that to other ways of delivering it, I think.
Can I quickly pick up on that and just ask if anyone around the table, the virtual table, has some thoughts about either what has been happening or what ought to be happening in terms of the interplay between government and corporates and wealthy folks with money in terms of trying to solve some of these problems? Because some seem like they're much more in the purview of government. I think Angela mentioned that earlier as well. Others less so. And Keith, you're talking about sort of the corporate angle. Maybe I'd love if anyone has a comment around how well that interplay is working or how it might work better.
There's very little printable that I can say about this government. And so
we're not doing politics.
But I do think that if the government is able to help the corporate and the other philanthropy sector, it will be by encouraging taxpayers to make gifts through loosening some of the restrictions. And also, one of the things that we've had a question in the chat line about international development and how to get people thinking, and by broadening the conversation, if the government could lead the way in terms of broadening the conversation to look more at the effect of COVID in throughout the world. It's not just a UK phenomenon, and the effect that it's had on some of the long-term development prospects. I think that will be important.
Yes, I agree with Richard. I think that that there are two specific things that could help, that the government could introduce. One is the charitable remainder gift scheme, which I referred to earlier, and the other would be to extend the regime we have at the moment, which currently only applies to the EU, Norway and Iceland, which is where a gift is made cross-border, and provided the purpose is charitable according to English law, you get the same exemptions and reliefs as you would do for a UK charity. To extend that throughout the world, that would be an amazing step forward.
That is excellent. I've been looking through the chat line. I think I've tried to pick up all the themes that have been mentioned in there. I know our CEO is about to come on and sort of conduct a fast round robin here at the bottom of the session for closing thoughts and comments. I guess I did want to just get some sense of, if there's something in the near term that we should be more worried about going forward. There's been a lot of comment that Brexit's had a bigger impact in the near term. COVID has had a bigger impact in the near term than Brexit, but they're both converging now. And should we be particularly fearful that they're converging at the same time? Are they sort of independent of each other and they just happen to be converging? I'd love some final thought there before John comes on.
Very quickly, it shouldn't necessarily be assumed that there'll be a no-deal Brexit. There could be a 5 minutes to midnight deal.
Okay, crossing fingers. Thank you.
Yes, I mean, I think we have to, if we have a major diminution in GDP as resulting from a no deal, then it's going to be, we're going to have to double down on the emergency relief factors.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, Angela, after you.
I think one of the problems is that both of them need all of our attention and that they're happening at the same time, and it's very difficult to deal with those things.
And not enough resources. Keith?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose you see, I share a lot of these sorts of events, and I usually call myself the miserable git intro, don't I? I try to. I suppose what I think we all positive as we can be, given how horrendous everything is. That sounds a bit of a wet end, but actually, unless we do try to make things work and try to make as many of these pieces fit together, we talk ourselves into things that are even worse than they could be. Particularly, I think, from a UK perspective, this double whammy, looking outwards from a Brexit perspective, that I think is a real danger.
Thanks for that positive note, Keith. That's good. Well done.
So I'm not that funny, is it?
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to extend the time for a couple of minutes. So we're not going to cut right off at 4:30. So thank you very much, Angela, Simon, Richard, Keith, and George. I'm going to ask each one of you to give final words of wisdom, 30 seconds, about your hopes for the future. And I don't know who to start first with. Maybe Simon, because he's, no, go ahead, Simon.
Well, I'd like to see Rishi Sunak as Chancellor repealing all the lockdown measures.
Thank you for being on topic. Angela.
I think it's about keeping that focus on people that you can't see. So as we're in lockdown and we increasingly see people who are like ourselves, making sure that we're looking outside our bubble and seeing people that are a little bit more hidden.
Thank you. Keith.
Yeah, I completely agree with Angela. I think it's that sort of transparency and recognising what causes need to be supported and how different bodies work together. I think there will be charities that go under and can't be funded, but actually the causes are the key things, not the charities.
Thank you. Richard.
I completely agree with some of the previous comments. I don't think it's about survival of the fittest. I think we need to evaluate where the philanthropic firepower should be directed, and we need to invest and think long term.
Thank you. Simon, would you like a second chance?
Well, I mean, I think I was on message, because I think we want measures that are going to ensure that the economy doesn't contract as much as people fear it might. But I think encouraging a positive approach to our philanthropic and grant giver clients is key.
Thank you. George.
I think I got where Simon was going. Football is a big deal for a lot of our arts organizations and others, so I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. I guess for me, it's about closing that uncertainty gap that came up so many times. And so this is a self-serving message, given my philanthropy impact hat and my day job hat, that if professional advisors can help close the gap around that uncertainty with good planning, good advice, cash flow modeling, all this stuff, if we can help close that uncertainty gap and therefore help unlock some of that needed capital that to be allocated and actually have an impact, that's my hope, that's my wish.
Thank you. I heard a phrase the other day, I read a phrase the other day, and I'm really pleased that we have not achieved that phrase, which is a funeral of hope, because it certainly isn't. And from what you're saying, thank you very much for doing this and for looking at the future and stuff. So thank you. Well done.
Cheers, thanks.
Thanks everybody. We may have run over slightly, but it was worth it, I reckon. Please come and join us tomorrow for our event, asking how the tax system should work in the new reality. We have a great panel joining from KPMG and law firm Morris Turner Gardner. The link has been shared in the chat to register for that. Next week, our Walk in My Shoes series will be taking a slightly different format, where we'll be welcoming George back as he interviews British entrepreneur and educational philanthropist Tom Alube. Thank you all for joining, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Here's all.